nordmenn sin feriefavoritt?
La sola skinne der sola aldri pleier å skinne.
For å inspirere oss alle har jeg invitert 20 kjente fjes for å utsette dem for de vanligste sommerutfordringene. Dere skal befri onkel Reidar for 5 flott. Og det en ekte båt!
Å, satan! Ekvador!
Til slutt står én igjen, den ultimate sommerstrategen.
20-stjerners sommerferie starter 30. juni på NRK1 og i NRK TV.
Hva skal du stemme ved stortingsvalget?
Elevene på barneskolen skal slippe å få hjemmelekser. Litt enig.
Litt uenig.
Vi bør innføre et tredje juridisk kjønn.
Enig.
Litt uenig.
Vi skal slutte å bygge vindkraft på land i Norge.
Uenig. Enig.
Hva mener du? Finn ditt parti basert på saker som engasjerer deg. Ta valgomaten på NRK.no Valgomat.
Herregud.
Det var jo veldig mye sexscener.
Ja, reiselysten stor tydeligvis.
Selv komikerne blir flaue over fortiden. En ny episode av Dette humor ser du i NRK TV. 22.10 viser vi nest siste episode i serien Ludvig, der Lucy drar til Wales i håp om å komme nærmere mysteriet om hennes forsvunne ektemann. Nå får vi sommernattskonsert fra Østerrikes hovedstad, Wien.
Earlier this year, a tech founder posted a video of a remote job interview for a role in his firm. But something was up with the candidate. They seemed to be using a filter to disguise their face, and they sounded strange. Who are they really?
We talked with experts, and they believe it may be related to North Korea.
I'm Beth Godwin, and after this on BBC Trending, we explore how North Koreans in disguise seem to be flooding recruiters in the US and Europe with applications for remote jobs.
BBC News with Eileen McHugh. Iran's health ministry says more than 400 people have been killed during the past 9 days of conflict with Israel. Iranian media have also acknowledged the death of another nuclear scientist. In Israel, more than 20 people have been killed by Iranian missiles. Rescuers in Gaza say 8 people have been killed by Israeli forces while waiting near food distribution sites. Israel says it's looking into the incident. The exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has been reunited with her husband after his surprise release from jail. Sergei Tikhanovsky was a key figure of the pro-democracy movement in Belarus. He was among 10 detainees freed during a visit to Minsk by the US envoy Keith Kellogg. President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of sending the bodies of its own soldiers to Ukraine as part of a swap deal. He said some of them even had Russian passports. Nigeria's government has condemned a suicide bombing in the northeast of the country that has left at least 10 people dead. A crowded fish market was targeted in Kondunga late on Friday. A hot air balloon has caught fire and plunged to the ground in Brazil, killing at least 8 people. The fire department in the southern state of Santa Catarina said 13 people survived, including the pilot. French scientists say they've identified a new blood group which only one person in the world is so far known to carry. The sample was taken from a woman in Guadeloupe. It becomes the 48th blood group. And a ceremony has been held in Nigeria to mark the return of a trove of artefacts looted by British troops during the late 19th century. The shipment from the Netherlands included ancient Benin bronzes. It's the largest such repatriation to Nigeria to date. They've been part of the state collection for over a century. BBC News.
Your avatar is kind of weird. Are you using something to change your camera view?
You're listening to a recording of David Michaldo. He's conducting a remote job interview for a position in his cybersecurity firm.
Can you take your hand and put it in front of your face to cover it partially?
But David can tell that something's not right. The candidate appears to be using a filter to disguise their face, and they sound strange. They asked David if his requests are a joke.
No, it's not a joke, because I can see that you're using some kind of software.
The candidate refuses to put his hand in front of his face.
No, like put it like this, in front of your face. If you don't do it, we'll end the conversation right now.
David ends the call. He was startled by the experience when it happened in March this year, but this wasn't the first time something like this had happened to his company. His co-founder Claudia experienced something similar last year.
My first instinct was, wow, okay, like, it happened again, like, what do I do now? And I thought, okay, this time I will record it. Because when the first incident happened, nobody believed us. People thought that we were joking. I wanted to make sure that we have a proof that like something this weird happened to us.
After the call, David looked carefully into the job applicants for his company's vacancies and found more than 20 that he suspected were also hiding their real identity.
When you just search them in Google, you won't find anything about them. And when you start looking deeply into their LinkedIn profiles, you will see that the accounts usually are pretty new.
This is not isolated to David's firm. I've spoken to several cybersecurity and software development professionals who say they've become inundated with applications from suspicious candidates too. And although they can't be completely certain, most believe these candidates have one thing in common.
We talked with experts and they believe it may be related to the North Korea.
Could the man on the other end of David's call really be from one of the most secretive and insular countries in the world?
For a couple of minutes, when he joined the call, I gaslighted myself because, I couldn't believe that this is happening.
It's a threat that may seem far-fetched, but evidence suggests the issue is much more prevalent than you may think. The FBI believes thousands of North Koreans have made millions of dollars using fake, stolen, or borrowed identities to work remotely in the US. I'm Beth Godwin, and for BBC Trending, I'm investigating how these North Korean IT workers are impacting tech companies across the US and Europe. We've tracked down defectors from North Korea with insider information about how these operations work.
That the North Korean government is responsible for these actions. This is the hack against Sony Pictures.
Cyber intelligence experts here in Seoul say that this has the fingerprints of hackers from North Korea all over it.
The attack was widespread and cost billions, and North Korea is directly responsible.
North Korea's cyber capabilities received widespread attention back in 2014 with the infamous Sony Pictures cyber attack. Sony was releasing The Interview, a film that included a fictional plot to assassinate North Korea's authoritarian leader, Kim Jong-un. In response, hackers inflicted devastating harm, leaking information and damaging Sony's computer infrastructure. This hack and some other major cyber attacks are believed to be conducted by the Lazarus Group, hackers that are associated with North Korea's military, although North Korea denies the group's existence. As for the IT workers, they're also raising funds for Kim Jong-un, but in a much more mundane way. It's understood that rather than raising money for the regime via hacking, like the Lazarus Group, more often than not, they're trying to get jobs at Western companies simply to collect the paycheck. They need to disguise the fact they're North Korean, not just because they can get paid more by impersonating Westerners, but because North Korea is heavily sanctioned by the international community, largely in response to the country's nuclear weapons program. It's hard to find out information about these IT workers, but through PS Score, People for Successful Korean Reunification, an NGO that advocates for North Korean human rights, we've spoken to a North Korean defector who used to be an IT worker. For his safety, we have used an actor to disguise his voice.
China is the most common base. Physically, we deploy to China the most, followed by Russia and then some Southeast Asian countries.
Hong Jin-soo, not his real name, worked as an IT worker for the North Korean regime for several years, mostly in China, before he defected.
Internet access is limited inside North Korea. Of course, there are limited places where it is possible, but they send us abroad so that we can work with easy internet access.
Jin-soo told us that at first he enjoyed his work and the opportunity to go abroad.
When I was in North Korea, the hardest part was getting enough to eat. But once you get to China, there's plenty of food you can have. most overseas IT workers are fairly satisfied. During the 3 or 4 years they work abroad, they generally don't have many complaints.
He described how he and his colleagues fake their identities to help them find work, often by firstly posing as Chinese.
We target countries like Hungary, Ukraine, Turkey, and the UK, and then we launder our identities once more there. Like, let's share your identity. In exchange, I'll pay you a certain amount of money per month, or something like that. They think we're Chinese. We spend 60 to 70% of our time contacting people to make fake identities.
And then using multiple fake identities, Jinsu and his colleagues would then be able to find work in European and US markets.
There are online outsourcing sites where you can find IT jobs. We create an account and register a profile, which of course is all fake. Sometimes later on, when you get paid, the company account comes up and then you see the name of the company and you realize which company it was. But there are so many companies, I don't remember any in particular.
Despite Jinsu saying that most IT workers are satisfied, they only got to keep a small amount of their salary.
The lowest salary we usually get is $5,000 a month. That leaves about $750 in my pocket, and all the rest goes to the state. We know it's just like robbery. We just accept it as our fate, and we just work, because it's still much better than when we were in North Korea.
Still, the working conditions were challenging.
We weren't allowed to go out and had to stay indoors all the time. After living like that for 3 to 4 years, the sense of confinement builds up. I suppose over time, people naturally start to desire more well-being, right? The desire for happiness grows stronger, and around then, people start saying they want to go back to home.
It's difficult for us to independently verify Jinsu's testimony, but we have seen second-hand information from other defected IT workers gathered by PS Score, which aligns with Jinsu's experiences. And I've spoken to another defector, Hyung-Sung Lee, who met North Koreans working in IT when he was travelling as a businessman for the regime in China back in 2008.
So I went to Chinese college and I got my undergraduate studying international trade and economics. So after my graduation, I got involved in trade between China and North Korea.
Hyung-Sung Lee, who now lives in the United States after escaping in 2014, comes from an elite family in North Korea. But despite his membership of the upper classes, he still had to do what every North Korean citizen does weekly, their life review session. Every Saturday, North Koreans attend group appraisals where they criticise themselves and their peers. Hyung-Sung told me he was sent to do this with a group of IT workers.
I need a group to have a weekly session, but I'm a young person and compared to other business officials, they're all so I was sent to the IT workers group.
This was in Dalian City in northeast China. Hyung-Sung managed to stay in contact with some IT workers after he defected. He told me that, like Jinsu said, he saw IT workers living in cramped conditions under near constant surveillance.
They put the surveillance camera on their screen and then they're monitoring what they are doing. And they have cell phones, secretly, but they don't have SIM card. So sometimes when they go out, they just capture the free Wi-Fi from a coffee shop and then they send emails and also communicate.
And this is one reason why it's become so difficult for IT workers to escape. From PS Score and other NGOs, we know that only a small number have defected.
IT workers are valuable. The regime's main source of income now is cybercrime. So, regime won't let IT workers go.
A United Nations Security Council report estimated that the IT workers scheme as a whole generates between $250 to $600 million a year for North Korea, directly contravening UN sanctions. Some human rights organisations describe the conditions these IT workers live in as amounting to human rights abuses. But despite this, like Jinsu said, Hyung-Sung tells me that being an IT worker can be seen as a desirable job in North Korea. We contacted the North Korean embassy in London to put the allegations in this programme to them. They did not respond. It's challenging to find out information from these IT workers, but the Western companies who have unwittingly employed them are also hesitant to speak. Almost none have publicly admitted to hiring a North Korean IT worker, even though the FBI thinks the numbers are in the thousands. However, one firm did go public with their story.
Hi, Rob Henley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ally Security. My former employer, who I used to work for, KnowBe4, had a very public situation where they had actually hired a North Korean. So I saw that all over like my LinkedIn feed and other places.
Rob's cybersecurity firm is based in New England. After a seemingly thorough interview process and background checks, Rob's previous employer, KnowBe4, spotted suspicious activity on their new hire's laptop, quickly disabled access to their systems and started an investigation. Their new employee had downloaded sensitive company data and sent a ransom demand. After sharing information with the FBI and Google, KnowBe4 concluded their new employee was North Korean. So Rob was pretty aware of the threat when he was hiring for his new startup.
It was definitely something that was kind of like in the back of my mind. The issue with the North Koreans started probably for us at least around November, December last year.
He told me that once he started advertising for positions at his company, right away the suspicious candidates poured in.
Like immediately, as soon as we hit post, we started getting applications and a lot of them were clearly scammers. So from the CVs, it's honestly hard to tell. I would do an initial 15-minute screening with everybody who kind of passed the initial test just to like meet them. So we would do them over Zoom, cameras on, and, you know, there was a bunch of like red flags you could see right away. Virtual backgrounds, like, you know, people masking their appearances, people masking their voices.
He tried to sift out the suspicious candidates.
I tried a bunch of different things. I started off just by asking, you know, like personal questions. I did do identification checks at the beginning of some of the interviews, but then I realized like these candidates were making it all the way through the process at other companies and actually getting hired. So they probably had like fake driver's licenses, fake passports.
And eventually he found an effective way of identifying them.
Ultimately, like my favorite question was, can you show me that it's daytime outside where you are? Literally, like, just move your computer, show me the daylight. We were only hiring candidates from the US for these positions. It should have been at least light outside, but I never saw daylight, so.
We shared David's video with Get Real Security, a digital forensics company. They say it's highly likely the candidate is using some kind of face swapping or AI filter. Rob estimates that between 3 to 4 in every 10 candidates that have applied for a job with him is a North Korean IT worker. He thinks he's probably interviewed around 30 of them. After his experience, David went back and reviewed the applicants to his firm too, and said a similar proportion appeared to be scammers as well. And if you think that number seems high, the founder of cryptocurrency startup Gatekeep believes 95% of the resumes he receives are North Koreans.
Initially, it was like a game to some extent, like trying to figure out who was real and who was fake, but it got pretty annoying pretty quickly.
We don't know for sure that the candidates Rob spoke to, or the person in David's mysterious interview, were North Koreans. They could be an applicant from another country outside of the US or Europe, just trying to get a job with a better salary. But we do know that North Korea's scheme is expanding into Europe, having boomed during the pandemic in the US.
A lot of people in the industry would understand that this is an issue in the US. As part of that, it's been a tougher environment for these North Korean operatives to work. They've had their infrastructure taken down.
That's Jamie Collier. He works for Google's Threat Intelligence Group. Jamie tracks the spread of North Korean IT workers and helps companies investigate when they believe they may have hired one by accident. He believes they are now increasingly targeting Europe.
What we see in Europe is far less awareness. We're often briefing security leaders across the continent who are surprised that this is even an issue at all. Europe doesn't really have its guard up against this issue, and that is allowing these IT workers to get in pretty easily.
Rob and David told me that around 30 to 40% of applicants they receive seem to be North Korean. That's a huge figure, and there may be fraudulent applications coming in from countries other than North Korea. But does it tally with what Jamie's seeing?
Yeah, I think so. And what we are also seeing is that there are these kind of multiplier effects, if you like. So actually, once you've hired one, they might recommend some of their colleagues or their co-workers. And that network of different IT workers that are endorsing each other, referring each other, it boosts the legitimacy of those.
And he thinks the man that David spoke to is probably a North Korean IT worker.
I think anyone that's kind of using AI to mask their face is perhaps a little bit of a red flag.
Jamie doesn't underestimate the savviness of these workers or the regime.
They're not just creating fake CVs that are claiming that they've got all these skills and don't have any capability to back that up. One anecdote of someone that was told one of their employers was an IT worker, and they said, you better be right because that's one of my best workers.
And Jinsu says the IT skills he honed working for the regime are now helping him settle into his new life.
IT technology is a global technology, so you can work and live anywhere.
And because he's no longer working multiple jobs with different fake identities, he's actually earning less money than when he worked for the regime. But because he can keep more of what he earns for himself, overall he's still being paid more. For now, Rob and David are confident the people they did end up hiring are who they say they are.
We do get together as a team, even though we're remote, so pretty confident at this point that everybody is who they say they are.
We pay for the flight tickets and the full day of work for the person to just understand if the person is real or not.
That's it for this edition of Trending from the BBC World Service with me, Beth Godwin. Thanks to Julie Yoon-Young Lee, Ed Main and our editor, Flora Carmichael. BBC Trending will be back with another series soon. Thanks for listening and goodbye.
Hello and welcome to More or Less from the BBC World Service. We look at the numbers and statistics in the news and in life. And I'm Tim Harford. Untruths sneak into our lives in all kinds of ways. Sometimes they're outright lies, blatant misinformation. But today, we're going to talk about something else. Those sneaky numbers and claims that bounce around our society that aren't exactly false, but are leading you down the wrong path. That's the subject of a book called May Contain Lies by Alex Edmonds, a professor of finance at London Business School. Let's start with a straightforwardly good piece of advice from Alex, if I do say so myself.
If you see a result that you want to be true, then as you say in your own book, Tim, just ask how it makes you feel. Because if it's something that you really are chomping at the bit to share with others on social media, then it may well be that why this study has become so popular is because of its appeal, not because of its accuracy.
What kind of thing might this be? Alex's first example is one we've looked at before on More or Less, the relationship between breastfeeding and the health of a baby. The idea that breast milk is better seems plausible, but is it true?
So the World Health Organization recommended exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, based on evidence that this leads to better outcomes across a range of criteria. So physical health outcomes for the child, mental development for the child, physical recovery for the mother, all of these were strongly correlated. But here's the thing, is that whether a child is breastfed is not random. It depends on family circumstances. So maybe the mothers who are able to breastfeed have a more supportive home environment because breastfeeding is tough. And it might be that that home environment, not the breast milk itself, is driving the better outcomes. And so when you control for home environment, are the factors such as the mother's own IQ, whether the mother smoked, family affluence, you actually find that the link between breastfeeding and many of these outcomes goes away.
So just to stick with topics that aren't going to annoy anybody, let's talk about inequality and the costs of inequality. You talk in your book about the spirit level, which is, it feels like a blast from the past for me because I interviewed Kate Pickett, one of the authors of The Spirit Level, back in, I think, 2009, maybe 2010, when that book was a huge bestseller. The Spirit Level is a book basically publishing a bunch of statistical evidence which links inequality, economic inequality, to social problems and health problems, crime, and so on. Now, I think a lot of people found that very plausible. You have your doubts.
Yeah, so again, this is an issue where the correlation is there in the data. So I'm not going to quibble with the correlation that they find. It's not due to mismeasuring particular variables or doing something dodgy with the statistics.
And the correlation is basically more unequal countries have more problems, basically.
Yes,
I mean, to dramatically oversimplify, there's not really any doubt that does seem to be true.
Yes, and this is across a range of outcomes, and so this is why they interpret this as a strong evidence of inequality. So the outcomes may well be gross national happiness, it might be obesity and health, so this range of outcomes suggests there might be a unifying explanation, which is inequality. But the issue here is, again, what they've done is they found a correlation. They have put on an interpretation which many people might be willing to lap up, because many people don't like inequality, myself included. However, there could be a whole host of other potential variables driving it, and one alternative explanation could well be poverty. Now, poverty is related to inequality, but it's not exactly the same thing, because if poverty is the true cause, then the solution as a government is to bring up those at the bottom, not necessarily to clip the wings of the people at the top, unless that's a way of actually redistributing wealth to help the people at the bottom. And so when you look at other people who've now control for poverty, they find that it's poverty which is driving the outcomes such as ill health and obesity, not necessarily inequality itself.
Needless to say, that's not the view of the authors of The Spirit Level, but we're just going to leave that there and move on. For a final example, Alex has been looking at research into the relationship between how diverse a business is and how well that company performs. For example, you might look at the percentage of women or ethnic minorities on the board of directors or the executive team. In this research, working out that first bit, the percentage of different people at the top of a company, is relatively straightforward.
But the issue is that there's lots of different ways to measure financial performance. You could look at sales, you could look at profits, you could divide profits by the total assets, by the total earnings, you could take out accounting issues like depreciation, or you could look at total shareholder return.
McKinsey, the global management consultancy, has released a series of influential reports on this subject,
which showed apparently compelling evidence that diversity is linked to performance.
More diverse companies equals better performing companies. But there was a catch.
The results were just not replicable when you looked at alternative measures of performance. So there was a replication which tried to look at 6 other equally plausible measures of performance and found that the results completely went away when you looked at the other 5 of the 6. And even in the one that they did report themselves, they found that the correlation was much weaker than was reported. But let's say, well, that was because they just didn't have the same data, and they could have replicated it fully had they had the same data. The point remains that actually, if you look at all of the other plausible measures of performance, then you actually get nothing.
All of these are good things to think about. The complex statistical judgments sitting behind plausible public pronouncements. But it still leaves the question, what are people who aren't trained in statistical techniques meant to do about it all?
This is an important question, because if the solution is you need to get a PhD in statistics, that's just unrealistic. People just don't have the time to do that. They don't have the time to look up every single reference and check every regression coefficient. But instead, what I'm trying to highlight in my book is that the skills to discernment are already within us. So whenever you see a study published on LinkedIn that people don't like the sound of, there is no shortage of alternative explanations. Maybe it was correlation but not causation. Maybe this was just a hand-picked set of numbers. Maybe they looked at performance over 1 year and they should have looked at it over a larger time period. Maybe this is too small a sample. And so when you see a result that you want to be true, one simple trick I give is imagine you had the opposite result and see how you would try to explain it away. All we need to do is to unlock the natural discernment that we have anyway, which we already deploy selectively when we see things that we don't like, but the idea of imagine the opposite ensures that we also use that discernment even when we want something to be true.
Thanks to Alex Edmonds, author of May Contain Lies. And that's it for this week. If you've seen a stat in the news that you think needs a stern look, please do let us know. Our email is moreorless@bbc.co.uk. Until next week, goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service with Megha Mohan exploring trans rights.
Days into his new term, President Trump said that transgender people are unfit to serve in the US military. I've been following the stories of 2 trans service people as that executive order took effect.
Inside the US trans military ban. Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Our reporter Kalgidan Yibeltal has been following events from neighbouring Ethiopia.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports from the Taiwanese capital, Taipei.
Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell sent this report.
The BBC's Nicholas Negos spoke exclusively to the president.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Welcome to the inquiry on the BBC World Service. The idea isn't a new one.
So in the 1950s, the call for what was then called the European type of army was already based on the threat of the Soviet Union.
Now leaders in Spain and France are among those who want it to happen.
It's rare that people who make this proposal actually spell out what they mean and what they're willing to give up here.
It would reduce dependence on other continents.
The idea is not to go against the United States, of course, but we must prepare for a scenario in which we will have to fight a major war on our own.
This week we're asking, are we closer to a European army?
Europeans are still not producing at speed and at scale what is needed to defend Europe.
I'm Charmaine Cozier. Join me on the inquiry after the news.
BBC News, hello, I'm Eileen McHugh. Iran says at least 430 people have been killed since Israel began its attacks last week. Iranian media have also acknowledged the death of a 10th nuclear scientist as the two countries continue to fire missiles at each other. Earlier, Israel said it had assassinated 3 senior military officials. Hugo Bashega reports.
One of them was Saeed Izzati, described as being one of the architects of the Hamas attacks on Israel on October the 7th. The Israeli military called his killing a major achievement. Another commander Israel says it killed was Benham Shadiari of the Revolutionary Guard's overseas arm. He was believed to have been responsible for weapons transfers from Iran to its regional proxies, including Hamas and Hezbollah. The Israeli military also hit the Isfahan nuclear facility for the second time in this conflict. It released footage showing extensive damage in the complex, but there were no reports of radioactive leaks.
The Turkish president has said Israel's decision to attack Iran 9 days ago, just before nuclear talks with the United States, was a deliberate act of sabotage. Recep Tayyip Erdogan was addressing diplomats from dozens of Muslim-majority countries at a meeting in Istanbul. He said Iran was facing Israeli state terrorism and described Benjamin Netanyahu's government as the biggest obstacle to regional peace.
İsrail'in terör saldırılarında bombardıman.
With its attacks on June the 13th, the Netanyahu government has actually aimed to sabotage the negotiation process. What has been experienced also shows that Netanyahu and his network of murder does not want any issue to be resolved through diplomatic means.
Rescuers in Gaza say another 8 people have been killed by Israeli forces while waiting near food distribution sites. Most are said to have been hit by gunfire in central Gaza. The others were killed near Khan Yunis in the south. The Israeli military says it's looking into both incidents. The exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has been reunited with her husband after his surprise release from jail. Sergei Tikhanovsky was among 10 detainees freed during a visit to Minsk by the US envoy Keith Kellogg. Sarah Rainsford reports.
Sergei Tikhanovsky is smiling broadly on the video, but he's lost a lot of weight since he was imprisoned in Belarus for his political activism against the country's authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. Another opposition figure has told the BBC that the release of such a prominent political prisoner had come as a complete surprise during a visit to Minsk by the US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg. As far as he knows, nothing was promised to Belarus in return. But for Lukashenko, the visit itself by such a senior American official will be seen as a breakthrough after years of isolation by the West.
World News from the BBC. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Russia sent the bodies of its own soldiers to Ukraine when it was supposed to be returning those of dead Ukrainians. At peace talks last month, the two countries agreed to swap the remains of servicemen killed in battle. Several thousand were supposed to be sent back by each side. Ukraine's interior minister had already warned that Russia was mixing up body parts of different people, making it harder for the remains to be identified. An accident involving a hot air balloon in Brazil has killed at least 8 people. The local fire department said 13 people survived, including the pilot. Our America's regional editor, Leonardo Rocha, reports.
The balloon caught fire and plunged into the ground in the southern state of Santa Catarina. Witnesses say the fire started in the basket and could have been caused by a blowtorch. Some of the victims had their bodies totally burned. Others jumped in despair as the fire spread, but didn't survive the fall from a high altitude. Survivors told Brazilian media that winds were very strong in the area and the balloon struggled to lift off. The area in Santa Catarina state is a major destination for hot air balloon rides because of its striking landscape.
A ceremony has taken place in Nigeria to mark the return of a trove of ancient Benin bronzes and other artefacts looted by British troops during the 1890s. The shipment from the Netherlands is the largest such repatriation to Nigeria to date. The handover was agreed with the Dutch government in February. French scientists say they have identified a new blood group which only one person in the world is so far known to carry. The sample was taken from a woman in the French Caribbean territory of Guadeloupe 15 years ago. But the French National Blood Service says it was only thanks to recent advances in DNA sequencing that it could be successfully analysed. That's the latest world news from the BBC.
Welcome to The Inquiry. I'm Charmaine Cozier. Each week, one question, 4 expert witnesses and an answer.